Before the next episode of X Job Downloaded starts, I have a big favour to ask. If you've enjoyed any of our episodes so far, please can you click on the follow button on your platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon and YouTube. It costs nothing to follow, but makes a real difference to me as a podcast producer. Thank you. My name is Paul Mulleary, and for 30 years I served with Essex Police. During that time, I interviewed suspects for murders, rapes, extortions and violent crimes. Now, I interview former members of the police and military and others who have done exceptional things in their lives. Sit back and listen to X Job Downloaded. This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Mulleary and this is X Job Downloaded. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing David Burgess-Joyce. Now, David is the former chief of the Special Constabulary, plus a number of other skills. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Paul. Nice to be with you.
Thank you so much for taking part in this today. But before we get underway, my first question is, where did it all begin for David?
Going back a long time. It was my 60th birthday at the weekend, so everything's a bit... When you're 60, Paul, you realise...
I've got a year to go.
I've got to be honest with you. I was a bit of a boring child, and I was very much into books, very popular with girls, especially when I did their homework, but I didn't have a lot of friends of my own gender. And I sort of reached the age of about 18, and I thought, what can I do to get out in the big world? And cut a long story short, there was an advert in the local paper, talk about, timing as everything. And it was to join Merseyside Police. And so I thought, well, I'll stick my hat in the ring. Went through a very long process, far longer than I probably expected it to be. And eventually a chief inspector interviewed me at the end and said, yes, join us. You're a bit young, but join us. And so at the age of 18 and a half, I started out, and my entire career has been law enforcement of some description. So that's where it started. Basically, Paul, in answer to your question, I had no friends.
Well, that makes two of us. I think that goes with the territory of policing, to be fair. So talk me through your police service, your police career. How did that formulate over the years?
To be honest, I did join and I enjoyed it so much. It was one of those, it wasn't that I grew into the uniform. The day I started, which was December 1982, that was it for me. I knew that was where I wanted to be. There was nowhere else on planet Earth I wanted to be other than in the police. I didn't have a family history particularly. I had an uncle who was a sergeant in Liverpool. But other than that, I had no sort of backstory. Most of my family were military. And so I think back in 82, policing was somewhat different, it's fair to say. My first duty was with what was called a warrant officer. You'll remember those,
yes.
Paul. Person who went round on a bicycle with a cape, of all things,
yep.
Believe it or not. And I joined forces with him. He was an old stager. He'd been in the army, had more medals than a Russian admiral. And I looked up to him enormously because I was a young kid, in effect. And it is fair to say that a couple of months later, he retired. He gave me his cape, which I still have. And I knew that was it for me. Cut a long story short, I never, ever, and you're probably going to be surprised here, never, ever once applied to be a regular police officer.
Yeah, why?
Not in 32 years of being a special did I apply to be a regular. And I think what it was, and I'm going to be mercenary here, and you're probably going to look down your nose at me because it is appalling, but I got myself a good job.
I get it.
I was earning... I was getting good money.
Yeah.
I was getting far more money than I would have been as a young copper, I've got to be honest.
Yeah.
And I wanted to buy a house at the earliest opportunity, and I just couldn't, where I lived, afford it on a bobby's salary at the time, starting out. And so I made that sort of awful decision, and it was an awful decision, that actually earning money and still being able to be in that world of policing, I got the best of both worlds. And it's just odd that even though I was there for 32 years, At no point did I go, right, okay. And I had loads of regular friends who said to me, why are you not joining the regulars? Why are you not? And I just never did. And to this day, there were so many missed opportunities where I was almost given a, come on in, we'll support you. And I didn't. And I look back and I had a wonderful time in the police. I really, really didn't regret a minute of it, Paul, not a minute of it. And it's given me so many skills. You know what I'm referring to. There's lots and lots of skills that you can use in real life, as it were. But yeah, I never once applied to be a regular. Weird.
Well, but I do get it, because actually you're talking about a time, 1982, we just had Edmund Davis implemented in 1979 when the Tory party came in. And, you know, and I think it's great. I really, and I'm not just saying this, the special constabulary, the skills that the special constabulary bring with them, you know, the business acumen, everything else. And I think over the years, and you've seen it more than anybody, they've developed their skills within the police service and they've brought their skills in. I know the City of London will use special constabularies that have got an accountancy background, for instance, to assist them with their frauds. The NCA, they bring people in to do, you know, all types of things. And I think it's brilliant, because it's gone are the days where it's like you're out with the special, or the special can walk the town. And I think that, and rightfully so, if you're willing to give up your time for free, because that's what you're doing, you're volunteering to do it for free, then you should be given the skills to carry out that role. It's not just about going to fetes and dealing with local community issues. It's about, you know, it's the bigger picture stuff as well, because we've all got skills and it's how we enhance them and we capture them and bring them to the table.
But in fairness, Paul, it is a two-way street, as you quite rightly allude to. I know that there are plenty. I mean, just on the analogy you've just used there about the City of London, I do know the chief officer of the Special Constabulary in the City of London. He is a business professional who's been a director of many, many high-profile companies.
Yep.
He brings enormous skills to the commissioner there. But equally so, I know for a fact that when I went down to see him at the City of London a few years ago, admittedly, he had a guy there who was an accountant who would charge £5,000 a day to his clients.
Yep.
And yet, if the police said to him, because obviously the City of London had that remit for fraud, etc., can you look at this balance sheet and find out where this fella is screwing the books? He would look at it and find it in 2 seconds, free of charge. And so, you know, that's a skill that the police can't afford. No. And yet, when I spoke to him, his attitude was, yeah, but the police has given me enormous skills in my day job. And I think that's the beauty of the two. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is an absolute rub between the two. When you're managing your time from 1982, how difficult was it to undertake the training that was required and put in the hours that were required?
Again, this is probably going to sound odd. I mean, obviously I was 18. I sort of had a girlfriend, sort of, but she came secondary to the police. Terrible thing, but she did. And I used to perform probably 2 or 3 duties a week. Definitely, you know, the nighttime economies, you know, your Fridays and Saturdays, obviously, where you were most needed. And it was, let's be honest, most exciting. And I made the time. Yeah. It's as simple as that. I made the time in 32, and I don't want to sound like I'm being full of myself here. In 32 years of service, I only missed 4 weeks.
Wow.
And the reason why I missed 4 weeks was because I had my right kidney removed.
Seriously? Oh, my life.
I know.
And did you work purely in Merseyside during that time?
I did. I mean, obviously up until 96, I was sort of operational out on the streets. I did the Wirral, which is the ratepayers part of Merseyside, which is fairly quiet in relative terms, Paul, in fairness. But quite often we journey over to the centre of Liverpool, which was, you know, in those days, the Wild West. And, you know, that would give you your excitement on a Friday night. And it would take Sunday for you to come down, you know, that kind of attitude, because you were so, you know, adrenaline driven. we did after 96, when I went to headquarters, the chief constable asked me to go to headquarters, and we had a team there to manage the specials, force-wide. I did work in other forces, so I did a lot of work in Cheshire. I did a lot of work in the Met, and the Met asked me to apply to be the chief officer there, just as a side issue. And those were the kind of things that we were doing because, Peter Fahey, who was the chief constable. Well, when I first met him, he was the deputy chief of Surrey. He was the lead nationally for Special Constabulary, and we got on really well and did a lot of work together to try and professionalise the Special Constabulary because it did need it. He then became the chief of Cheshire, so had a bit more power, and then he became the chief of GMP, even more power. And so he helped open a few doors. You know how it works, in order to get me in front of various people, Home Office, etc., etc. And so we did start to push the envelope of the specials and make it far more professional. And as you've quite rightly stated, Paul, I think when I joined in 82, most of the bobbies had more medals than you could imagine because they'd either been in the war, or they'd been in subsequent wars, been in Korea or whatever. Yeah. And so they had a mindset that was fantastic. And I loved it because I came from a military background. But one might suggest they had a certain view of policing that may not be very comfortable now, he says diplomatically. And so as time went on, the police service modernised. And I thought it was important that if the Special Constabulary was going to survive, then it should also modernise. And so I did a lot of work with HMI, a lot of work with the MPIA as it was then, to try and get some standardisation of procedures, whatever, within the National Special Constabulary, particularly around pastoral care, making sure that you nurture your volunteers, because if you nurture them, they'll come back again and again and again. And, I know it sounds bleeding obvious, but it wasn't always working in all forces.
No, absolutely. And you're absolutely right, because to get that volunteer out on a Friday, Saturday, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, you need those people on the carriers. You need that additional support. And what was your relationship like at the commencement of your career with the regular officers compared to the conclusion of your service around inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy for specials to say, oh, I went out with a bobby on Friday and he never spoke to me. And he was what I very quickly realised, Paul, is bobbies are just human beings like the rest of us. They may have been on duty a lot longer than I'd been on duty. They may have seen something, had to deal with something that I didn't know about. And so quite often, if there was a bobby who was particularly narky for whatever reason, quite often when you got to it, because I'm a talker, as you probably pick up, I can talk for England. And eventually when you talk, something gives. And I had literally about 3 duties in, we went to a really bad car crash involving children, absolutely appalling. And it was a bit of a wake-up call. Let's just say I started out at 18 on that job, and I was about 38 by the time I finished.
Right.
It was awful.
Yeah. And
the bobby I was with never spoke to me from the moment I got in the car. And I thought, oh, okay. So I rabbit on, as you do, eventually he'll speak to me. We got the call, went to the job, and it was appalling. And I didn't disgrace myself, Paul. I did a decent job for an 18-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, he came to me and I won't say his name, but he was in tears because it was awful. I think we were both in tears, if I'm being honest. And he gave me a hug. And he said to me, you've been the best oppo I've had in a long time. And after that time, he kept on asking for me to go out on duty.
Good.
It's just an anecdote I appreciate, but in answer to your question, sometimes it's not that they're anti-special. It's just they've had a bad day or a bad week, and you just happen to be there.
You're such a diplomat, I tell you, because I've seen the other side where it's, I had the old sweats who'd never go out with a special constable, and there wasn't that acceptance, and I don't think they were having a bad day. I just don't think they were particularly nice people, if I'm honest with you. But it is interesting.
Just on the side of that, Paul, interestingly enough, being very philosophical about it, it was funny that the ones that you talk to your mates about and say, oh, so-and-so, he's not very friendly. You'd find that they weren't very popular on the block with their colleagues.
Yeah.
So it wasn't necessarily just you as a special. They were just a narc with everyone.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Life's too short. How did your service develop? Because I would imagine when you first started, accepting that you went on to be the chief officer of the Special Constabulary, but when you first started, it would have been you're walking the town, you're going, and it would take a while before you probably got into a car and went on patrol in a vehicle.
In fairness, if you were in the city centre of Liverpool, then the likelihood of you as a special getting in a car was probably fairly remote.
Yeah.
But because I was on Whittle, which was a little bit more sort of old people's home, if you know what I mean, with regards to policing, it's where they used to send the bobbies that they didn't really want in the city centre, mentioning no names. But you had a greater opportunity to be in a car. But I actually quite liked walking. I really did like walking the beat. And I have to be honest, I had extra pairs of waterproof trousers, if you know what I mean, Paul, because I really liked walking the beat. And I liked meeting people. And I know it sounds corny and all a bit sort of, old-fashioned Dixon or Dock Green, but I loved meeting people. And people loved meeting you because it was a uniform and the old biddies felt, more comfortable and there's somebody round. And, of course, what a better way to get intelligence than actually just chatting to somebody at the garden gate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I used to be blunt, I used to come in with an awful lot of intelligence. And that was purely because I would just wander around and people would talk to you. And especially if you were on your own. If you're in pairs, it's probably less approachable. But I'd go around on my own, scared stiff. I was 18. But actually, people talk to you all the time. And I love that. I've got to be honest. I really did. And so sometimes when the block sergeant would say, right, Burgess-Joyce, you're in with, whatever car tonight, I'd go, oh, okay. And somebody else go, because I just love walking.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, but that was what I wanted to do. And because I was there, and you'll understand this, Paul, because I was there because I wanted to be there, not because I wanted to pay the mortgage. I actually wanted to do something that would engage me, not just sit in a car and look at the world going past. So from 82 to 96, I was fully operational. I was out there doing everything it's possible to do. I'd volunteer for everything. Even if it was bloody awful, I'd volunteer for it because I just wanted that experience. And I look back and I just think I got far more out of it than maybe some of my colleagues did because, I'm not doing that. Well, why not? Well, it's boring. But it doesn't matter if it's boring. You learn something from everything.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I absolutely believe in the sanctity of the police service. I know there are people out there that let us down, but that's comparable in every walk of life. And if I've said this before, if you take an organisation, any organisation the size of the police service from England and Wales, you'll have people that will let you down. It doesn't matter where you are. Yes, what things that people do nowadays are horrendous, and there is no place for them in policing, and they're getting rooted out. But I believe that a lot of this is down to basic training. When we had regional training schools around the community policing element of it, when we had police houses, and where that's systematically been eroded, I think that's where the police service has started to take a dip.
Now, I've thought about this a lot over the last couple of months because obviously there's the Cousins incident and others brought it to life. And of course, as usual, in the media, one Bobby's bad, all Bobby's bad. Yeah, which I find grossly offensive personally, having experienced so many Bobbies that I've met over the years.
Yeah,
and that I can comfortably say 99% of them just want to do a decent job.
They do.
They just want to do a decent job. Quite often their hands are tied by poor leadership, in my opinion. This is my opinion now. I'm not
I agree.
Asking you to agree.
I absolutely do
poor
agree.
Leadership in the police has been a cancer. I really do. And I think the College of Policing, probably one of the worst organisations I have ever encountered, that's supposedly a professional body.
I absolutely agree with you.
somebody said to me, who was the best Bobby that I've ever worked with? And I'll tell you his name because he's passed away now, bless him. It was a fellow called Billy Piercy. And Billy Piercy had a pretty tough upbringing. He was in a rough area. Sinker state is probably an understatement. But he was a good lad, good-hearted chap, rough as they come. He was the best Bobby I have ever met. And yet he didn't have a qualification to his name. And he just became a police officer because that's what he was good at and that's what he wanted to do. And he's the same guy, Paul, that you'd be walking along the street with, you know, minding your own business, not seeing anything going on. And he'd have a nose for something. And we'd suddenly turn right down an alleyway. And the next thing is, there's a couple of lads coming over the back, having screwed a house.
Yeah.
He said, how did he know that? Because he was just constantly having a nose for it. And so my attitude has always been, we should not recruit bobbies with university degrees in the history of art. Now, I like the history of art. It's fascinating. I love that. It doesn't make you a good bobby, Paul. What makes you a good bobby is a bit of this here,
a full heart.
And that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And quite frankly, those people don't have those qualifications. And I think that's where the police has gone wrong. It's had the best of intentions to try and professionalize the police. But in reality, what happens is you end up with a load of kids who don't really have the skills. They also have certain indoctrination, which they get at universities, which we all know about. And then as soon as they join the police, after 2 years probation, they really want to be a sergeant. And then they really want to be the chief constable because that's what drives them. And that's what's driven them at university. They need to be at the top. Nothing wrong with that, but you can't have a field marshal's baton in every police officer's knapsack.
No,
and that's
can't.
where we have a problem, I think. And with the greatest, I'll stop now, Paul, but the greatest problem I used to think with the police almost was the rank structure. Because I guarantee you'd always get somebody with 3 pips and they'd come along with a really great idea. And that great idea would cost a few bob. And the only reason why they had that great idea was so they could impress the chief of the board to become a superintendent. The fact that when they became a superintendent, that plan that they had went belly up and cost the force a lot of money was irrelevant. It was just to get promotion. And that is the biggest problem I saw in the police. I
absolutely agree.
No.
I think, if I'm really honest with you, within the regular police service, and I think mediocrity is another byword. And the reason I say that is because many, and I'm not saying, and I've got some friends that sit on the top tables, you know, the MPP, great people. Andy Prophet, who's the DCC in Essex. I've done public order with him when he was the chief inspector. You know, absolutely brilliant people. But mediocrity has just consumed the top tables in so many forces because they never got into any trouble. They were never the ones that were fighting people on the streets. They were always the ones coming up with the brilliant ideas, but never really implemented them correctly. And the lions are literally being led by donkeys.
I could not agree more.
And I feel sorry for the lions that are at the top, but the lions at the bottom are not being led properly.
And I don't think, in fairness, and this isn't just prevalent in the police, it seems to be across the public sector or all across, is there's not a great accountability. We have chief constables who effectively make decisions, or chief officers who make decisions that don't really have much accountability. Because if you get, if you're an assistant chief constable in one force and it doesn't go quite so well, don't worry, there'll be a deputy's post somewhere that you'll just move sideways or upwards into. And, the chief constable will give you a good reference, funnily enough. Who'd have thought to get rid of you? And, mentioning no names, but, I've seen an awful lot of chief officers in my own force, and some of them were promoted beyond the level of their incompetence.
If you look at Mark Rowley, he has 2 masters. He's got James Cleverley, Home Secretary. He's got Sadik Khan. He can't do right for doing wrong, the ideologies that are being spoken of at the moment. Poor old Mark Rowley, he just cannot do it.
Well, the problem is, it's the old adage of deputy heads will roll. And, I guarantee you that when the wheel does come off, as it nearly has recently, it won't be Cleverley or Khan who will be taking the heat.
No.
It'll be Mark Rowley.
Yeah.
Because, deputy heads will roll. That's the way life is.
Yeah.
And if we get on to the Serious Organised Crime Agency later on, there's a story to tell on that one.
Yeah. I will take you up on that. How did you get into being the chief officer of the Special Constabulary? How did that happen?
Well, but I say back in '96, we were doing some work. I was then what was classed as what they called a subdivisional officer, so sort of an inspector in the Special Constabulary, and I was, happily doing my bit. Had a good team of people, good arrest record, which went through to court and they were successful. Good record operationally. Anyway, cut a long story short, we had a visit to the local Nick from the chief and the chief officer of the specials then. And cut a long story short, I must have given a good account of myself. And he said, would you like to come and do a project in headquarters? So I ummed and ahed about it because, to be honest, going back to my earlier point, Paul, I like being out in the streets.
Yep.
And I thought, it'll only be a couple of weeks out of my time. I was there permanently, and then they promoted me. And then in Merseyside, we ended up getting, just at that point, the same rank structure as the regular force. So I ended up with 3 pips,
right.
Rightly or wrongly. You agree with that or not, it's irrelevant, but that's what the situation was. So I was there and then I became the staff officer to the chief officer of the specials because he was quite happy with what I was doing. And it sort of started to roll then a role came for a special superintendent. So I applied for, you can see where this is going.
Yeah.
But I became administrative then. And because I was okay at forming words on a page and reasonably good at, giving speeches and what have you, the usual story, it became more successful in Merseyside. And then the biggest break I probably got was Norman Betterson when he became the chief. And whatever people think of Norman Betterson, I love the bones of that man. He was such a gentleman. He really was, is. And I thought he was fantastic. But anyway, I know he did come with some history around Hillsborough and all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, I thought he was a fantastic chief constable. And he sort of nurtured me a little bit because my office was only just down the corridor from his. And then we had good people like Paul Stevenson, who went on to become the commissioner.
Yep.
He was a forceful chap. I worked with Jim Sharples, who sadly has just died. Another great man, Bernard Hogan Howe, was an ACC at Merseyside, left, and then came back as the chief. My last chief was John Murphy. Again, all good people that I worked with and learned an awful lot from, and they saw something in me. Anyway, the chief officer of the specials retired after 38 years.
Wow.
I know, yeah, 38 years. And so the vacancy came up and I applied for it and obviously it was successful. So I have to say it was a great time in my life because I had a good job in law enforcement. I was the chief officer of the specials. I was having a great time. I really was. And I was working with some really good people. And in fairness, trying to be diplomatic here, the chief officers became somewhat more professional as time went on.
Yeah, no, because
I'll leave it at that.
I get it. So, what was your day job at this point then?
Well, I started out as an insurance at an insurance company doing HR, which I loved very much. But that gave me a good grounding in report writing, researching, all the kind of things that the police are very good at.
Yep.
And I fitted into the police probably better, Paul, because I worked for a large insurance company where if you were bored with your job, you held a meeting. That kind of attitude. Yeah. And then various other people would have another meeting to talk about the previous meeting. And that frustrated the hell out of me, I've got to be honest. Whereas I came into the police environment and the police attitude was, here's a problem. What's the solution? and how quickly can we find that solution? And I love that kind of environment, I've got to be honest. And so I was like a pig in muck, should we say, in that environment on the first floor. I was doing a lot of work for the chief officers of the regular force over particular things to do with HR. And actually, some of the reports that I wrote, I very happily allowed chief officers to put their name to. I won't say what they were, but then became policy within the force because they were happy with what I'd written and what I'd researched and whatever. And so I was in my element, I've got to be honest. And going back to that point about the forensics accountant in the City of London, I was very happy to give my expertise, for what it's worth, my expertise to the force for free.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's a public service, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
If somebody got promotion on the back of it, Paul, well, so what? As long as that policy was a good policy.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did an awful lot of that. And as I say, Bernard Hogan-Howe, not everyone's cup of tea, but I liked him very much. He was very good, very professional. And he was a chief constable who got things done. That's what you pay him for.
But you tell me a person, popularity, there are people, we all have detractors. And the higher you get on in life, the more detractors and trolls you have. So, I met him a couple of times when he was at the yard, always very polite, always very professional. Same with Paul Stevenson. I met him socially. My big faux pas with him, I didn't know who he was. I was at the Australian High Commission and I was with a whole group of, and I was a DC at the time, I was with a whole group of senior police leaders, Alf Hitchcock, there was a whole host of them there. And I said to him, what do you do? And he said, I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. You could have knocked me down. I didn't know. I just didn't have a clue. It was too strategic for me at that time. But when you conclude your time as the Chief Officer of Special Constabulary in February 2014, what was that like? You've done all those years, 82 to 2014. What was the driving force for you to say, right, there's the keys, I'm off?
Health.
Right.
I have a defibrillator fitted because I was adopted, Paul. I don't have any familial history.
Right.
So, cut a very long story short, Merseyside Police, as they did with all chief officers, and they very graciously included me in the chief officer bubble, for want of a better phrase. I had an annual sort of MOT.
Yep.
Went along to the Nuffield Hospital. Everything was fantastic. No problems at all. Very healthy, no problems. However, you've got a little bit of a heart murmur. We're not quite sure what that is. Cut a long story short, I ended up, I've got a congenital heart condition.
Oh, wow.
Which didn't know about, obviously. Hadn't, touch wood, caused me any issues, but I had to have a defibrillator fitted.
Right.
And, that's not the best thing in the world,
No.
And certainly not good on duty, if I'm being honest.
No.
Get a punch on that and, that's not good. So I have to say, whether it was intimations of mortality, Paul, or what, but 32 years, and things were changing a little bit. And I wasn't entirely comfortable with some of those changes.
Right.
John Murphy was about to go, who'd been very supportive, I've got to be honest. And the PCC and I probably didn't hit it off quite as well as we might.
Right.
I'm trying to be very diplomatic here because they're not here to defend themselves.
No, I get that.
But I think you know where I'm going. I just felt things were changing and I didn't want to be part of those changes. And it sounds terrible and very arrogant, but I wanted to go out on a high.
No, I absolutely get that. And, it's like being a boxer. If you fought all your fights, why would you go in for a last round and get beaten? You leave as the world champ.
So, as I say, a mixture of the health issues, which did cause a little bit of the grey cells to start thinking, should I be doing something else with my time, however long it may be? And that sounds melodramatic, but you have all these thoughts.
No, you do.
And so that was that. And the chief had a very nice retirement do for me. And, it was a very emotional time, I've got to be honest. I was giving up I'd been there all my adult life.
Yeah.
I was 18 when I applied. And I literally, I'm not, no word of a lie, I missed 4 weeks in 32 years.
Unreal.
Sad as that. But yeah, it was sad. And it took me a long time to get over it. And what I did, and I'm still doing 10 years later, is I've started to write it down. Because what I used to do, my mother was a great diarist.
Right.
I know it makes her sound like Samuel Pepys, but you know what I mean. She used to write diaries. She started in the Second World War when she worked in the RAF, and she wrote a diary, and she did so every day for her entire life, really. And she got me thinking that maybe that's what I should do. So from 1982, I wrote a diary of my duties.
Wow.
And now, don't get me wrong. Some of them were a couple of lines, did nothing, stood next to a broken window. The usual sort of things that, the 99% of policing. However, when in 1996, I went to headquarters and I was sitting in an office 3 doors down from the chief constable. Let's just put it that way. There was a lot more to write, Paul.
Cool. Yeah, of course there was. Of course there was.
So there's some stories to tell. And I've got to be honest, I wrote a lot then. So I would come home while it was fresh in my mind, and I would write down things that had happened that I'd seen. Much of it, of course, would never see the light of day because I didn't think that I would need to. So what I've been doing probably since about 2015, end of 2015, is I've been writing a book.
Right. Fantastic.
And I'm currently on 450 pages. So whether it would be published, I don't know. It's irrelevant. It's probably boring to most people who are outside the job. But there are some juicy, interesting bits in there that might get me
sued.
He says diplomatically, skirting around the issue. But at the end of the day, it's there. I've got stacks and stacks of diaries. What the difficult part was going through them all.
Yeah,
because you'd go through them all and go, hang on, that one's worth putting in a book. That one. Waste of time. That was the hard bit. The writing is the easy bit in my head because I just down on the page, and somebody else will edit it, of course. But so that's how that's the cathartic situation I'm in of writing that book, remembering some of the good things, remembering the bad things, and that's how I got through it, Paul. To be honest, and I'm sorry, a long answer to your question. Sorry.
No, that's absolutely perfect. But before you left, you were the head of the organisation development for the Serious and Organised Crime Agency.
Well, before that, I was the National Crime Squad. So I was there for the last sort of 2 years of the National Crime Squad. And I know the history of regional crime squads and all that kind of stuff. Don't need to repeat those. But the National Crime Squad, I thoroughly enjoyed my 2 years there. What an absolutely fantastic place that was. I know it sounds corny, but it felt like a family.
Yeah.
I know that sounds really corny, and most of your listeners will be going, what on earth is this fella on? But seriously, from my own perspective, Paul, I loved every minute of working for the NCS. I really did, because everyone just appeared to be going in that direction.
Yeah.
Whereas with respect in some organisations,
Yeah, it's more of a grown-up, that environment, the detectives environment is more of a grown-up, and everybody's working towards the same ends, as you say.
It was funny, though. The first day I joined, I was interviewed, obviously, in Pimlico, which is where the headquarters were, and it was all very hush-hush. So I went down on the train, and I don't know if you know their office, but it's not the easiest to find.
No, I don't know.
I'm looking around and I can't see it. And I'm thinking, well, no, this is the address. So I went into the sweet shop, which was literally near the entrance. And the woman, literally before I walked in, she said, "Oh, hello, love. Do you want the National Crime Squad?"
It's so secret. The local shopkeeper. Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Brilliant.
So not a great start, but there you go.
And you were going to say there was a story that was connected to the NCA or soccer. What was it you said about?
Well, I think the problem was, and again, I'm going to be controversial, but I can talk about soccer because it no longer exists. Thank goodness. When I talk about the National Crime Squad being a fantastic group of people, it is fair to say that I had a large part. Trevor Pearce, the Director General, again, a guy I love the bones of. He was the Director General of the National Crime Squad, and we did a lot of work to try and push the National Crime Squad staff into soccer when it started in 2006. I don't think I have ever worked for an organisation as truly disjointed and incompetent as the Serious Organised Crime Agency, because you had all the bobbies from the National Crime Squad who were still focused on doing the job. And then you had all the HMRC people who were on a different contract, of course, didn't have the same mindset and wanted better pay than everyone else. I'm going into minute detail here, but you get the gist of it. Yeah. And then there was the National Criminal Intelligence Service. They were also involved in it. And then you had some parts of the board. And it was this amalgamation. It's like bringing together 4 dinosaurs and trying to make it into some sort of beautiful gazelle. I mean, it just didn't work. And Charles Clarke, who was the Home Secretary at the time, who sort of originated it, is a well-intentioned sort of chap. But I think he just pulled out what hair he had left, because it never worked in all the time I was there. You had so what would happen, Paul, is you're a chief super in the Met, for argument's sake, and you're coming up to your retirement. So you approach me, and I'm a deputy director in I'm your mate. I'm your deputy director in the Serious Organised Crime Agency. And so you say to me, "I'm retiring soon," and they go, "Oh, right, I've got a job for you." "Oh, what is it?" Head of paperclips. "Yeah, but I don't know anything about paperclips." "Doesn't matter. The job's yours." Mm-hmm. So they invent a department with you as the head, as what was classed as a grade 1, chief super. So not only did you have your chief super's pension, but you also had effectively a chief super's salary as a grade 1 in soccer. You had these people who knew nothing about the job they were given, who were earning probably in the equivalent of about 75% more than they were on the job.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Yeah. And of course, the problem then was that, well, you're a grade 1. You need a couple of grade 2s to support you. You can't just be a grade 1 on your own. And so you'd invent a department. And therein lies the biggest problem with soccer. You had so many layers of management that nothing got done.
No.
Nothing got done. And that attitude of the police, which is the can-do attitude, just went out the window because there were too many layers. So eventually either nothing got done because there were too many egos in the way, or bobbies, who were the only people who actually wanted to get anything done, just go, "Do you know what? Why bother? Just waste of time."
Yeah.
Just a waste of time. So sorry for being controversial, but I thought soccer was an appalling organisation. I mean, at one point, Paul, they actually had about 4,500 staff, and they had 27 deputy directors.
Bloody hell.
27 deputy directors, which is classed as an SCS grade 1, all on 100,000+ a year.
But how does that? Yeah, the police forces are having money stripped out of them to subsidise. You couldn't make it up.
You couldn't. But unfortunately, as I said, so thank you, Doctor. I've got that off my chest.
But so tell me then, what on earth possessed you to go for the Police and Crime Commissioner's role?
Probably because the police and crime commissioner on Merseyside was a well-intentioned person, but was more of a social worker and liked to give out public money to groups that she had a personal interest in, which I'm afraid I was against because, I'll give you an example. They'd have payments made to Group X, and then you'd say to the PCC, right, okay, it's a year on. How many people have they, succeeded with in their charity? Don't know. Well, you must have set a figure for them to, achieve in a year. No, and then just give more money to them. And I used to think, well, if they're achieving something, then by all means give them more money. Maybe things like reducing recidivism or something like that. That's all very laudable for, and I'm all for that. But if you've got no stats to say how successful they are, why would you give them more money? And so it was things like that I just thought I could do a better job than that. And so that's why I went for it. Pure and simple as that. It was not that I wanted the job. It was purely about, can somebody else do it other than this person? As I say, not a bad person. She wasn't a bad person. I just think because she hadn't been in the job, as it were, I think the wool was pulled over her eyes on occasion.
But do you think, the political affiliation aside, do you think that the police service has become more politicised as a direct result of the introduction of the PCCs, or do you see a benefit?
Yeah, I have to say, even though this probably sounds a bit odd, I applied for the PCC's role. I'd get rid of them tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because the problem is, and if we use the example of the Met, which you brought up before, Mark Rowley is on a hiding to nothing. You've got a PCC who is obviously politically driven and is in an election year. So he's obviously going to do things that play up to his voter base. Well, that's not policing.
No.
We don't care who you vote for. It's whether you've done something wrong or not. And you've then got Cleverley, who's coming from a different perspective. And so Mark Rowley will never achieve anything successful. No. What he will be the fall guy if it goes completely wrong.
Yeah, he will.
That's guaranteed, because it certainly won't be Mayor Khan, because I'm pretty sure he'll be re-elected again this year, and James Cleverley may or may not, without being too political, may not be in post at the end of the year. No. You just don't know. But whoever replaces him, they'll still be political, just for a different, side of the coin. So they'll always have their own drivers. And I think that the problem with the PCC is it was done with the best of intentions, as many of these things are, Paul. But in reality, the unintended consequences are you end up with a political police force, not because they are political, but because in order to get anything done, they have to look like they are.
Yeah, absolutely
the Met
right.
Currently in that boat.
Yeah, they are. The issue I see with it is, whilst the police authorities weren't perfect, they did actually bring in the public from all sections of society, and they would canvass all political parties in order to build the police service that they saw to be fit. Now it's all one dimension. If you've got a Conservative PCC, as we have in Essex, everything's driven around that, and then you've got the Labour Party, whatever it may be. Unfortunately, and it is unfortunate, if the Labour Party gets in, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police will have a Home Secretary who's got a Labour Party background, a Mayor that will have a Labour Party background, and extreme Labour Party. Who would want that job?
Well, to be purely non-political here, the same I would disagree with if they were both Conservative.
I agree. Yeah, no, I agree.
I don't think it's right, because you do have that attitude. Okay, some people in the Conservative Party would say, well, conservatism is more akin to... Because you know yourself, back in the 80s, most police officers were Conservative voters.
Yeah, they were.
Let's be blunt.
Yeah, they were.
That was the nature of the beast. But now, you wouldn't know. And in fairness, I do think I go back to my earlier point is, a lot of the bobbies now have been to the local indoctrination centre, which is the university, and they've come out with a warped view of the world. And I worry that sort of ability that bobbies used to have to just say, you've either committed a crime or you haven't. I don't care who you vote for or which football team you support. You've either done something wrong or you haven't done it wrong. That's going, and that worries me enormously.
Yeah, me too. Me too, because you've got, well, there's a whole host, and we could talk about policing all day, but I like people to have their own thoughts. I absolutely do, but people should be dealt with without fear or favour. Now,
correct.
I know that here am I sitting in my T-shirt, and you look very smart, sir. But the fact is that you believe in standards, and I think that's probably where we met on LinkedIn, simply because, and I'm sure he's a lovely chap, but the officer who had the Mohican haircut and he looked like a bag of whatever, that wouldn't happen on my watch. If you walked into my office, I would be called a bully now, because I'd be sending people home to shave, to get their hair cut, to do, if you didn't have a shave, you get sent down to custody to go and use the razors out of the custody suite. Now,
that's right.
Standards matter, and the standards that are built into our era of policing, whilst they weren't perfect, they were more perfect than what they've got now. And
I mean, I've got to be honest. I couldn't disagree with a word that you said there, Paul. And it resonated with me. My wife and I were in Chester City Centre a couple of weeks ago, and walking towards us were two officers in baseball caps with what looked like a functional jacket. You remember what I mean by the functional jacket? Yeah, anorak. They were both open, flying open. They had no epaulets on. And those were two Cheshire police officers. And my wife looked at them and looked at me, and we didn't have to say anything because I think we both knew the same thing. It doesn't matter. I know people say, oh, but it doesn't matter. It matters about the person. It doesn't. I could have walked past my mother in uniform and she wouldn't have seen me. She'd have seen the uniform. And I'm afraid, I think we look at the uniform now, it looks like paramilitary. I know it's more practical, Paul, and I don't want to sound like an old fart here. I understand the practicalities of it. But there's something about wearing a smart uniform that already, before people even speak to you, sends a signal. You're in charge. You're the Bobby. You will always be in charge in every situation. Yep. It doesn't matter whether the army turns out, the general appears. You are still in charge of any situation that happens. And I think the police have forgotten that. They now think they're just there to turn up, put a few bollards around a car crash. They're not. They are in charge. And every single Bobby, even with a week's service, is still got to be a leader.
Absolutely.
Because when the car crash happens and the public are looking and going, what are we going to do here? It is the Bobby that takes the lead and says, you go over there and see that he's alive. You go over here and do some CPR. You stand there and make sure no more traffic comes down the road. It's things like that that Bobbies should be. And the very first thing you want is that they look the part.
Yep.
And I'm afraid I do take probably this is controversial, but I actually think we need to go back to the military style. I don't mean militaristic. I'm not suggesting that, but military style, where you actually, when I joined, there was a guy called Robin Spencer who was the sergeant, the drill sergeant, because we used to have drill sergeants then, you'll remember. And his uniform was pressed to an inch of its life, and he garnered respect the moment he walked in a room. He didn't have to say anything. And that was because you looked at him and went, if he's that careful about the way he presents himself, there must be something good up here. And there was. And I think we've missed that as a police service now.
I agree.
They just look like the local council security guard, when they should look like Bobbies.
Yeah. But
I'm being emotive here, Paul. So
no, I agree. I absolutely agree.
It really frustrates me.
But you see, professionalism, one of the things when you go through promotion boards, they ask you about professionalism, or they include professionalism in all of your examples. Now, are you telling me that the people that turn up for those promotion boards turn up dressed the way that they go out on the street? Because I guarantee they don't, because that's not professional. So why would they do that for an hour's interview with a chief officer or with an inspector or whoever, but they can't be bothered to do it when they're walking amongst the public that they are serving, the public that have actually, dare I say it, put that uniform on their back?
But don't you think, Paul, and again, I'm giving you a thought here, but isn't it down to, let's be honest, the most important rank in the police, as it is in the armed forces, the sergeant?
Yep.
Isn't it down to that sergeant to engender, to cajole, to enforce the standards within their block or their serial or whatever terminology you have in your force, to say, this is, because I know that when I joined in 82, all the sergeants were as scary as hell.
Yeah.
I mean, they were scary.
Yep.
And you didn't put a foot wrong. And you didn't put a foot wrong, not so much that you thought they were going to hit you, but because you respected them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you didn't want to let them down. And I don't think that's happened now, because we've got so many people, there's an ex-commissioner of the Metropolis, I won't name, it's not fair, who basically said that as soon as their probation came through, they were off to be promoted. But they had no skills, and that sergeant stripes, that was just a leap to the next rank, to the pips. That's all they were using it for. So they didn't learn anything when they were a sergeant. No. And so if they didn't learn anything, how are you going to pass that on to the troops?
I know.
It's appalling.
It is.
And so I do believe in a more military-style policing. And we wouldn't have had this problem in London over the last couple of, years. It's not just the Palestinian marches, in fact. There's a whole host of things where the police almost feel like they don't quite know what to do. The Stop Oil protesters, what do I do? Am I going to get supported if I do something that's a little bit aggressive? If I take somebody off the streets, which is a crime to block the highway, am I going to get supported by my senior officers? And if you don't think you're going to get supported, Paul, you're not going to do anything, are you?
No. But that's the public at large. If the public at large see a crime in action, 9 times out of 10, they won't report it because they think, well, what's the point? Because I'm not going to get the support from the local police. And that's the reality. The problem we've got, David, is that across this entire country, there will be Davids and Pauls having similar conversations because the frustrations, and, we're of a similar age, but we care. It's not because we've got a downer on the police. It's because we actually care about the job that we did, the communities that we live in, and the futures for our respective families, because it matters, and it really does matter. But I can't seem to. I just don't know why, and I do feel for some of the chief officers, because they must be having the same conversations as we're having. But it's for them to have the impact with their sergeants and make sure that they do the right thing. And it doesn't matter. As many chief constables in the country could stand up in front of a promotion or a group of cohort of sergeants and say, you're the most important. Well, then support them. If they're that important to them, support them. Get behind them. Stop taking rubbish complaints every time somebody puts a dodgy video up because the PC's grabbed hold of somebody in a particular way. The copper is trying to do their job.
Well, on that particular subject, I do think the biggest problem in the police is not the rank and file. I do think it is leadership. I think two elements to that. You have that sort of middle management who are always looking for the next promotion. So they're not going to rock the boat, not going to do anything controversial, anything to support the troops. If the troops need supporting, well, it might just jeopardize me getting a crown, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that, in many respects, isn't necessarily their fault. That's just the nature of the beast of what has been set up as a promotion round. But I think chief officers as well are in a very difficult position, because many of them are driven by this appalling organisation called the College of Policing. I personally find that the most offensive organisation the police has ever had to deal with, because it is a political organisation. I don't mean political as in, red or blue or whatever, but it's political in the way that it seems to sort of go with the flow of public opinion. Well, I'm sorry, public opinion is almost irrelevant. You've either committed a crime or you haven't committed a crime. That is it. It is as simple and as black and white as that for policing. And the nuances might be fantastic, but I don't remember the nuances being quite so important when the NPIA was there or ACPO was there, because they were much more traditional organisations that basically said, what's the best for the police and what's the best for the public at large in supporting the police. That's how I always viewed them. Yeah. And then the College of Policing comes along and it's all about, right, gosh, should we be pushing this? And then, of course, I don't have any issues, as I'm sure you don't, Paul, with anybody's sexual proclivity. No. But I'm sorry, seeing bobbies en masse in pride uniforms, what on earth is that all about? We understand that bobbies should not pick on anybody for the colour of their skin, for their sexuality, their lifestyle. Well, what on earth is that all about? No. We've got vans in Merseyside that have got Black Lives Matter on the side. Well, I think that was pretty much rubbish as an organisation, as a Marxist organisation, and one about a rainbow. It should be unsaid that bobbies do not choose to pick on somebody because they're gay or because they're black. That should be a given. You shouldn't have to put it on the side of a van. And of course, what it does, as my neighbour next door but one is a black man, and he made a very interesting comment about the vans that go round. He said, you and I get on really well, David. If you and I had an argument and the police were called and the van turned up with BLM on the side, do you think you might feel a little bit more uncomfortable than I do? And I couldn't argue with him because I thought to myself, that's a black man telling me that he's offended by what the police have turned up in. I mean, you couldn't write it, Paul. And that's where we're at as a police service.
Absolutely. The fact is that workers' rights are protected now. They've never been so protected. If there is an issue, then it needs to be dealt with, and it can be dealt with in a particular way. The Police Federation of England and Wales was formed in 1919, and that encompasses every single part of legislation around equality and fairness. Therefore, the actual ancillary, this association, that association, they're not relevant. They're ideologies. That's the realism. I get it that in days of yore, people were treated in a terrible way and they needed to have that additional support. They needed that to have the bravery to come forward, and rightfully so. They needed that. But we're now at a point where people are included.
I mean, I think you're spot on, because I've always had an issue with the Black Police Association, and I had a long conversation with the chair of it, because my attitude was, you don't need it. Black officers, I said to him, do black officers get treated badly here? And he went, no. So why you've got a separate organisation? Well, we just have. I said, but no police officers ever come to you and said they've been treated badly. And he went, no, actually, we have a good relationship in Merseyside, as I'm sure they do in most forces. Yeah. And it's this othering. I think that's the word they use now, isn't it? Othering. You see, I don't want segregation. I look at a black officer or a gay officer. I just want to know that they're going to watch me back.
Yeah.
When I'm out on duty, I couldn't care less what colour they are, what proclivities they have. It's irrelevant. And that's the problem we have, is we've become very sectarian in life now.
Yeah.
But we've gone sectarian in the police, and that's never a good thing, because the police need to be completely focused on, it doesn't matter. I've worked with people, you've worked with people, Paul, who you didn't particularly like much, but they always had your back. That's all that matters, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
That is all that matters. And I find that the police now have gone to the point where, we don't have the women's police force now, quite rightly. But now we have a situation where we're actually putting 5'3" women police officers on the front line in a very dangerous situation. The bobby next to them, and I'm quoting now a Metropolitan police officer who I know well, who told me the reason why they're terrified now to deal with much of the protests in London is because not only do they have to deal with the protester and protect their own safety, they now have to protect the safety of the 5'3" female officer who will get a good hiding from somebody, because the days of not hitting a female police officer are long gone, Paul. And so that's why maybe the police aren't pushing back as much as they are, because they're terrified of what will happen to the female Bobby. Now, you'll call me sexist, but you can't help it. If you are a male officer on a line, and next door to you is, you know, an 8 stone, 5'3" female police officer, you're going to be terrified she's going to get hurt.
Yeah. I agree. The inclusion, and this is the other thing, all these separate groups have forced this separation, that when we're trying to promote more inclusion, you've got some great people that are trying their absolute hardest to try and get people to work together. But even within the different groups, there are factions. You know, somebody's from a different part of... you know, it just drives you absolutely nuts. But anyway, so what are you doing now?
Right. Well, I'm still writing the book, which does take up a lot of time, I have to say. I did the estate agency for 9 years. That was purely, again, something to do. I'm okay financially. I've been okay financially for a long time, and which is a nice position to be in. And I just fancied doing something. Bearing in mind, I'd spent 32 years legally nosing around people's homes. I thought, I might as well do the same thing and become an estate agent. So I have to say, I started that, and it just went mad. It went completely mad, because the very first job I had was a solicitor rang me up and said, do you sell hotels? Now, of course, the answer to that should have been, no, of course I don't. I only sell houses. But of course, being the kind of person I am, Paul, I said, of course I sell hotels. Selling a hotel is incredibly difficult.
I'll bet.
And I don't know, I must have just been lucky, Paul, but I sold that hotel and it made me £52,000 in fees.
Wow.
And I thought, this looks like a good job to me. So we just sort of go on beyond that. And I did it for 9 years, which I hadn't intended to do. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I sold it in February. So I decided that I'd continue with some of my skills. So I do a bit of consultancy now, on and off. But no, I'm probably a man of leisure now, as much as anything. Just writing a book, occasionally speaking to good people like yourself, and just generally being a nuisance, really, as I say.
That's brilliant, though.
Last month.
You left the Special Constabulary, you're 50 years old, so time was on your side. But you're right, as we get older, we face our mortality in a different way. We face our mortality in a different way, and we have to make the most of what we've got left, because none of us know.
No, and to be honest, I you know, cards on the table here, because I know this is what you want. But if I look back at my time as a special, I would probably be described as a bit obsessive. And I lost my marriage as a result of it. Justifiably, it was my fault. Hands up. I had a wonderful wife, and basically I was never there. We got married in 91, and I carried on specialing as you do, and it was terrible. And I was married for 10 years. She put up with me for 10 years, but I lost her because of that. I can tell you that now. I lost my wife because of my policing. There you go. My fault, no one else's. But I also think, because I was injured quite badly on duty, in 92, 93, I was punched in the back quite badly. Anyway, cut a very long story short, I ended up losing my right kidney because of complications and what have you. So, as you can see, I've lost quite a bit in my policing career, for want of a better phrase. And I think at the age of whatever it was when I left Merseyside. I'd done 32 years. I actually think I'd done my bit for Queen and Country, as well as
and
I wanted to be with the person that I'm still with, and not be the bad husband that I'd been with my wife.
What happened to the attacker who assaulted you?
He got 6 months.
6 months. You lose a kidney and he gets 6 months.
Yeah.
Incredible, isn't it?
I have a scar on my stomach, Paul, that goes from my navel right round my back because something happened during the operation. And so instead of doing the sort of keyhole that they intended to do, they had to just literally, cut me in half. So, yeah, I have to say, I do look back and I think, do I have any regrets? Not the injury, because you can never foresee the injury. That's just the nature of the beast, isn't it? It's just what happens, isn't it? But yeah, should I have treated my wife better? Yeah.
That's very candid,
that's
David.
Life, isn't it? That's life.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is life. And it is difficult because, I mean, I know what we did as a regular officer, but then I wasn't holding down another job. So I'd finish and I'd have done loads of overtime and gone home. But you'd have finished one job and you'd gone on to do another.
Well, in fact, it was so bad, Paul, that I used to work in Liverpool, in the city centre in Liverpool. I would literally take my uniform to work, get changed in the toilets at work, put obviously a civic coat in. You don't want to go in half blues on the bus, do you? But and literally go to the station.
How many days a week would you do then?
I definitely always do Friday and Saturday,
right,
for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But occasionally, if there was something else, the usual. So, I mean, I know it's a hackneyed thing, isn't it? Oh, the specials doing the garden fetes, but I used to quite like that, the Sunday events, that kind of thing. And where I live, there's a place called New Brighton, which is like a little holiday resort type thing. And there was always something going on a Sunday. And to be blunt, I've got to be honest, I was a young, thrusting guy, and I'd be out there on the promenade, talking to all the nice ladies, as you do. And so, occasionally it would be 3 days a week.
Fantastic.
And I pretty much did, for 32 years. So I know people are probably laughing at this podcast now going, nutter, but that was what I enjoyed doing. And, I was very happy doing it. As I say, the only regret in life is what happened with my wife. But other than that, I loved every minute of my police work.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I will let you get to your day and I will speak to you soon.
Take care, Paul. Nice to talk to you.
Take care. God bless. Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks ever so much for listening to this episode of Paul Mulleary's X-Job Downloaded. Please like, follow and share with all your friends. Your support is absolutely invaluable and makes a real difference to me as a podcaster. Thank you.